LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 9th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 13 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, informative media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. I'll mainly be covering my title topic, Pandemic of the Unvaccinated, Climate Change Remain Big Threats. Most of the clips are actually on the pandemic, because here in the United States there's a huge surge from the Delta variant, especially amongst the unvaccinated. And I'll have several clips on that. Dr. Anthony Fauci talking about that. And then 3 Republicans from like most reasonable to least reasonable. I'll have Asa Hutchinson, governor of Arkansas, Bill Cassidy, senator from Louisiana, and then Rick Scott, senator from Florida, all talking about that. Then I'll actually only have one clip on climate change, but, you know, if like 50, 100 years in the future, if people are looking back on what the corporate media was covering, that's probably what they'll be looking for. Did they cover the biggest story, which is climate change? And climate change is here, as you'll see from that clip when I get to it. I put descriptions of all the clips down in the video description. You can see summaries of what is going on in each of the clips, all 13 of them. And at the end, after I do the news summaries, the pandemic clips, the climate change clip, I have a couple viewer request clips. Clip of Pete Buttigieg talking about infrastructure, a clip of Representative Cori Bush talking about her controversial comments on defunding the police. But as usual, I like to start with a political comedy clip. And I'm going to do something I haven't done in quite a while, which is take a clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, which I've seen some people say has gotten kind of unwatchable as Bill Maher moves more and more to the right. He hasn't quite, as I've said before, done the full Dennis Miller, but he's definitely getting more conservative and more, hey, you kids get off of my lawn type rhetoric as he gets older. And he had, I'm not going to take a clip from the monologue, I'm actually going to take a clip. There was this interesting debate between Ben Shapiro, this conservative YouTuber, and Malcolm Nance, this MSNBC commentator. I'm not actually a big fan of either Malcolm Nance or Ben Shapiro, and they had a conversation about critical race theory that was moderated by Bill Maher, who is not really qualified to moderate such a discussion, and there was a lot more heat than light, I would say. There's a link down in the video description to the source of all my clips, including the whole 9+ minute segment on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, uploaded for free on their YouTube channel. But I just want to show you like the last minute and a half that shows how this discussion, which was not really all that enlightening to begin with, devolved into just like sniping, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch the political comedy clip for today's show together over here.
I think that what's happened here, as this terminology, sort of like defund the police, has been hijacked and been framed around the left as that they want to do all this, they want to rip down the entire social fabric of America, and they want us to be guilty about everything. I want you to teach history. I had a lot of people in the military. Hold on. I had a lot of people in the military, senior officers who had to make life and death decisions, who were total morons about the cultures and institutions and countries we were going into, and people died because of that.
So I have a question.
I don't need that here.
If we agree that history should be taught, why are you defending critical race theory, which is not history?
Did I not just say a moment ago that I think that term has been hijacked and that's not what we're talking about?
Okay, so let's say critical race
theory.
I'm going to go back and repeat that I didn't say that.
Okay.
You are literally defending critical race theory by redefining it as just teaching history, which is a cheap semantic trick, and you know it.
Is this what you do on your show? Because it sucks.
Malcolm, Malcolm, I apprate that, but I will comfort myself tonight by sleeping on my bed made of money.
I'm sure we have an adult. I'm sure we have another adult subject to talk about.
And neither one of them are really behaving like adults. Why would Ben Shapiro think that you can like win an argument by bragging about how rich you are? Or I guess because Malcolm Nance was bagging on his show, and I don't think I've ever watched the Ben Shapiro's YouTube channel. or any of his broadcasts. I have seen Malcolm Nance a lot, and I think sometimes he's too much of an apologist for the real deep state, the military-industrial complex. He was in the military. He was an intelligence officer. Sometimes I think some of the things he says are overly speculative. And the thing that I most disliked about that discussion, like I said before I showed the clip, is it was not really enlightening, and it goes right from the beginning. What is critical race theory? And Ben Shapiro actually had a fairly good definition of it if you watch the whole clip. But then what are they teaching in the schools that are making white people feel bad, which has nothing really to do with critical race theory. And so I've actually been thinking about making a real video about critical race theory and how it applies to like ACLU free speech policies. That there's this great Yale Law Review article that I saw a few years ago, and then I found the author of that article is at Howard University, the head of their like civil rights, I can't remember the name, center or whatever. And anyway, there's this great video that I could make if people want to see it, where I talk about how critical race theory criticizes ACLU's First Amendment, protections for hate speech and First Amendment, the belief in how robust First Amendment protections are going to protect marginalized communities, when often that is not really what happens. And anyway, if any of you want to see me make that video, you can let me know down in the comment section, either in the live comments or for the recorded show viewers. I've been already doing some research to make that video, and that's something you might see in the next several weeks. But I want to move on now to the news summaries. And now that NBC News Meet the Press is back after 3 weeks off, even though Chuck Todd always says, and he said at the end of the program yesterday, if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press, even though at the beginning of the program here, you'll see that he actually admits that they've been gone for a few weeks. 2 weeks for the Olympics, and then I think the week before that was British golf. So that doesn't stop Chuck Todd and his producers from having the longest, best news summary on the COVID outbreak. It's sort of a good competition between NBC and CBS. I'll play them next to each other. The NBC News Meet the Press one is about a minute longer, and I think they're trying to make up for things they didn't report on in the last few weeks. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, first introduced by Chuck Todd, and then he transitions to his pre-recorded package, and as usual, he has the longest, best package over in this clip.
It's Sunday morning, and it's nice to be back after a few weeks away. I hope you've enjoyed the Olympics. I know I've enjoyed watching Team USA do pretty well. We return with the country, though, facing two compounding challenges: the Delta variant and polarization. Delta is burning through the country right now, creating a growing but sadly preventable fourth wave of COVID infections. In fact, right now, the 7-day average number of new confirmed cases has soared to nearly 118,000. This is the highest we've had it since February. And while vaccination rates are rising again, and 50% of the country has now been fully vaccinated, this is now largely a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And that's a direct result of the political polarization I was referring to. Vaccination hesitancy, or just plain opposition, is infected by politics. Check this out. NBC News has found that the 20 states with the highest rates of vaccinations, they all voted for President Biden. 18 of the 21 states with the lowest rates all voted for President Trump. Need we say more? Nevertheless, the wave is taking its toll on President Biden. He's the president of all the states. In a new CNBC poll, approval of Mr. Biden's handling of the coronavirus is sitting at 53%. That's down from 62% in April, when cases were falling dramatically. The president's overall approval rating is holding steady at 48%, still higher than President Trump ever was during his 4 years. The irony that the unvaccinated who sparked this surge never supported Mr. Biden in the first place is not lost on this White House. But as Mr. Biden is learning, whether he likes it or not, as COVID goes, so goes his presidency.
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So we have to get more people vaccinated.
With cases spiking in 38 states and up in all 50, the Delta variant is driving a surge of hospitalizations and deaths, ripping through the southern United States.
If Florida and Louisiana were countries and not states, they would be number 1 and 2 in the world for the incidence of COVID.
We are admitting 1 COVID patient per 45 minutes.
We're back to square one. That's why I'm frustrated.
16 states have banned vaccine mandates in some form. 8 have banned mask mandates in schools as cases in children and teens are on the rise. President Biden, whose presidency rests on his COVID response, expressed his frustration.
I say to these governors, please help. But if you aren't going to help, at least get out of the way.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis fired back as new cases in Florida this week hit an all-time high.
We can either have a free society or we can have a biomedical security state. And I can tell you, Florida, we're a free state.
But many public officials, frustrated by deja vu all over again, are beginning to point fingers at the unvaccinated.
It's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks.
You've lost your minds. You are the ultimate knuckleheads.
Vaccination rates are up in some of the hardest hit states. But for those who remain unvaccinated, just 37% say Delta has prompted them to wear masks.
Never been vaccinated. I think a lot of it's BS, but that's my feelings.
We truly have 2 Ohios. One group of people who are safe, one who are not.
This weekend, an estimated 700,000 are gathering in Sturgis, South Dakota for a motorcycle rally, which became a super spreader event last year. Seeking to combat a rising tide of misinformation.
What's in the vaccine? Give me the insert sheet.
Some Republican officials are shifting their tone.
We're going to be living with people dying if we do not increase our vaccination rates. So I still...
While a growing number of companies institute vaccine requirements for employees, and states and cities begin to consider them too.
I think we need to get all hands on deck informing people how important this is, but I don't think we can sell a mandate in Montana.
Hospitalization rates among the vaccinated remain low, but worries over a rising number of breakthrough cases prompted another change in CDC messaging. 2 weeks ago,
if you're vaccinated, you have exceptional levels of protection from that vaccine, and you may choose to add an extra layer of protection by putting on your mask, and that's a very individual choice.
But just days later, the CDC recommended vaccinated people wear masks indoors in nearly 90% of the country.
Those people can now, with the more transmissible Delta variant, transmit to other people.
And joining me now is Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's, of course, the...
And I will have 5 minutes of Dr. Anthony Fauci coming up, clip 7, if you look down at the clip summaries down in the video description. But some of the things that I wanted to say about that news summary, first, I think it had the best coverage of the politics of the pandemic in terms of, and they even talked about the twin scourges of the pandemic and partisanship at the beginning of the news summary before the package. And I've seen a lot of the clips. I had missed that Ron DeSantis clip talking about it's a choice between a free society and a medical security state. I mean, talk about your paranoid hyperbole that, you know, mask mandates and vaccination requirements is not really a medical security state in the middle of a pandemic, in my opinion, but you can let me know what you think. Oh, by the way, you notice that Chuck Todd used the phrase vaccination requirements, which is something that people on the left are trying to do in terms of their messaging and their language, rather than vaccine mandates, because mandates are bad, but requirements are good. I don't even get that, but that's something I've noticed in the media. And even though Chuck Todd did follow the correct messaging of vaccine requirements, not mandates, he did report on the problems with mixed messaging. That, I mean, I criticized Fox News last week for focusing on just the Republican talking points, like the mixed messaging from the CDC. But there is a real story there, and you see Chuck Todd covered it. I also like the way they took, local governmental bodies having public comments from people who are just crazy about the vaccines and mask mandates, and that's something I've seen locally. I spend a lot of time watching, like, my local county board of supervisors meeting and my city council meetings, and especially recently I've been watching the board of supervisors every 2 weeks when they have the meetings. They're all these people who come in and say, COVID is a hoax, vaccines are, more harmful than helpful, and masks are, mask mandates are also more harmful than, all this like misinformation. And there are people who like really believe it so much that they go out and make public comments and this is happening all around the country. So I thought that was something good that NBC News Meet the Press covered in their news summary as well. The CBS News Face the Nation news summary, I think, is also very good. It's shorter. It's a brief introduction from John Dickerson and then Mark Strassman, as usual, reporting from Atlanta. One thing I like that you'll see more emphasized in this news summary is the effect on children. Like almost 1 in 5 of the COVID cases are children, because that's where there are a lot of unvaccinated people. And anyway, I'll talk about that news summary a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We thought we were done with that feeling in our fight against COVID-19 that one step forward could be followed by 2 steps back. But we're not done. The U.S. is now reporting an average of 100,000 new cases a day, up from 15,000 a day just a month ago. Public health officials expect that number to go a lot higher before it begins to drop. What is different, though, is that during this time of backslide, there is something that we could only hope for during previous ones, a vaccine. But 100 million Americans who are eligible for the vaccine have not gotten it. We begin this morning with our senior national correspondent, Mark Strassman, in Marietta, Georgia.
Cajun country versus COVID. It's not a fair fight. Louisiana has one of America's lowest vaccination rates. COVID hospitalizations are 8 times higher than they were 5 weeks ago.
People are younger and sicker, and we're intubating and losing people that are my age and younger.
In 2 weeks, 1% of Louisiana's entire population has caught the virus.
We have no reason to believe in our data that we reached the peak or that we're coming down. We have more children sick with COVID-19 than at any other time during the pandemic.
Across America, 71,000 kids tested positive in the last week of July. 1 in 5 new cases, as the Delta variant stalks the unvaccinated of all ages.
The level of sick visits that we've seen this summer, June, July, and now August, I've never seen in 20 years of practice here in Houston.
Another negative, surging positivity rates. 20 states are over 10%. More alarming, Idaho, Oklahoma, and Mississippi over 40%. 2 states, Texas and Florida, make up nearly 1/3 of America's new COVID cases. Both governors oppose universal masking as schools open.
We can either have a free society or we can have a biomedical security state. And I can tell you, Florida, we're a free state.
Free state, costly approach.
So we have basically patients everywhere in both sides of the unit.
On Friday, the state set a daily record, nearly 24,000 new cases. Hospitalizations have quadrupled in a month. Deaths have doubled. Despite the runaway spread, COVID's culture war is unrelenting. More schools open this week. More parents will square off about protecting kids.
Can't mask the kids. It's unconstitutional. It's child abuse, and everybody knows it.
Anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers.
These folks back there have lost their mind. You've lost your minds. You are the ultimate knuckleheads.
The only way to fight against it is we get the shot.
Urgency now drives vaccination campaigns. Right behind the Delta variant lurks the Lambda variant. More employers have a new vaccine policy. Get it or get gone, including Microsoft, Tyson Foods, and United Airlines. Here in Georgia, the number of new daily cases is at its highest level since late January, before the vaccine was widely available. Hundreds of them in metro Atlanta are kids. They tested positive during the first week of school. John?
Mark Strassman in Atlanta, thank you. We go now to the Arkansas governor, Asa Hutchinson.
And I will have an Asa Hutchinson clip there, but you saw a lot of the same clips there. You did see like some crazy guy on the street. He wasn't at a governmental meeting, but saying, masks putting masks on our children is unconstitutional, child abuse, and you saw that same Florida Governor Ron DeSantis clip saying, you know, we have a choice between a free society and, oh, it's a biomedical security state. I said medical security state, but it's biomedical security state, which, I mean, that's crazy. Is that crazy? Like I said, I think the CBS News Face the Nation, I guess compared to Meet the Press, did a better job because it's shorter, all the same facts are there, and there's a lot more, I think, looking at the impact on the people and especially the impact on children. I think that was especially emphasized in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary. Now, you saw how both those last news summaries talked about this partisan conflict between President Biden and like Governor DeSantis of Florida and Governor Abbott of Texas, and so it's sort of like a Democrat versus Republican, and the mask mandates are one of the things that they're really fighting about. One of the reasons I think that Democrats are winning that argument is what Fox News decided to focus on in their news summary, because if Republicans were winning this argument, if this was like a winning issue for Republicans, the fight between Democrats and Republicans on mask mandates and vaccinations, etc., that would be what they're focusing on. But they don't even mention it at the beginning of Fox News Sunday. Bret Baier is in as the host this week, and then Peter Doocy, supposedly straight news reporter Peter Doocy, supposedly straight. I don't think so. And instead of covering COVID, they covered the infrastructure deal and the fight between different wings of the Democratic Party, and then the bipartisan deal versus the reconciliation package. And the subtext here, I mean, it's not even subtext sometimes, it's the text is that Republican talking point I've talked about. I even showed you how they have a graphic Biden spending spree. Well, that's what they're really emphasizing, how much it costs, with the, how big the spending is, taxpayer dollars. It's pretty ridiculous, and I will talk about the Fox News Sunday news summary with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. A rare stroke of bipartisanship as Senate Republicans joined this weekend with Democrats to advance a bipartisan infrastructure bill that would provide federal dollars for roads, bridges, and broadband internet in cities and states across the country. The debate continues today up on Capitol Hill. If approved, the bill would go to the House, where Democrats have tied its fate to a larger spending bill filled with liberal priorities. In a moment, we'll speak with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who's been traveling the country to sell the plan. But first, let's turn to Peter Doocy in Wilmington, Delaware, with a look at the state of play on one of President Biden's top priorities. Peter.
Bret, if there's no last-minute agreement to speed things up, then a vote on final passage of this infrastructure package that carries strong bipartisan support could happen as soon as 2:30 a.m. Tuesday.
We can get this done the easy way or the hard way.
Republicans choose the long way, refusing to allow a vote until amendments can be debated.
There's absolutely no reason for rushing this process and attempting to limit scrutiny of this bill, other than the Democrats' completely artificial, self-imposed, and politically driven timeline.
Some others fear long-term damage to the economy.
Inflation's going way up because the federal government's been spending way too much money that it doesn't have.
But President Biden argues jobs won't be created if the government doesn't spend big.
90% of the jobs created by this legislation will not require a college degree. 90%. It's a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America.
Eventually, this infrastructure package is expected to pass. Then debate shifts to a much larger $3.5 trillion reconciliation budget bill.
Let us rock and let us roll.
Which means Democrats can maneuver to pass it without any Republican support if they can get all their own members on board.
We can't wait to get Democrats on record over many more trillions of dollars in reckless borrowing to fund socialist spending on radical policies that families are not asking for.
While the Senate works, the president is here at home in Wilmington. No public events on the schedule, but we do expect him in Washington in time to watch Congress give him permission to spend another $1 trillion taxpayer dollars. Bret.
Peter Doocy reporting from Wilmington. Peter, thanks. Joining us now is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary.
And I will have a Pete Buttigieg clip near the end because a viewer requested it, and I'll talk about the viewer requests when I get to those clips. Congress's permission to spend another $1 trillion of taxpayer dollars. Just the very end of Peter Doocy's report there. It proves the point I was making before I showed it, that it was really, there was a lot of subtext and even text on the whole Biden spending spree that is a huge talking point on Fox News. You notice even Bret Baier, the supposedly straightest of straight news anchors, other than maybe Chris Wallace on Fox News, he started off talking about first the bipartisan bill and then the larger spending bill filled with liberal priorities. I don't know. I mean, maybe they could have called it human infrastructure or other spending, or I don't know, liberal priorities. That seems a little pejorative, especially to the Fox News viewer. You notice they showed clips of politicians in the pre-recorded package, but there was the only substantive clips that, really reinforced the argument that was in the news summary from Peter Doocy were the Republican clips. They had Chuck Schumer at the beginning saying, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, which doesn't really advance any particular argument. And then at one point he said, Biden argues jobs won't be created unless government spends big. And then they show a clip of Biden saying, this bill is going to create a whole bunch of blue-collar jobs that don't require a high school diploma, which doesn't even back up what Peter Doocy was saying. So, as usual, the Fox News Sunday News Summary is most biased, both in terms of its topic choice of the infrastructure deal, rather than talking about how unvaccinated people, especially in states that Trump won, as you saw in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, what was the top 20 states with low vaccination rates and high COVID cases were Republican states. But that didn't even come up on Fox News Sunday in that entire part there, the entire beginning part of the show. And like I said, before I showed the clip, I think if they didn't concentrate on that, it means that Republicans are not winning that argument. I did see, while I was looking at the live comments during that clip, that I got a Super Chat contribution from Lulu Girl there saying, listening and working, so not too talkative today. I really appreciate the Super Chat contributions that help support the videos I make financially. I also appreciate the people who become YouTube members by clicking on the member link down there. That's one of the places I've been getting viewer suggestions. On Saturdays, I've been posting the guest lists from on the Sunday shows that the Associated Press puts up every weekend before the shows, like who are the guests going to be on the shows that I watch and take clips from. Something I always have been checking for many years, and now I've been posting that list and asking people for suggestions from my YouTube members. And also there's a link down in there to become a Patreon patron. I put up a patron only post asking for suggestions, and I will be responding to a couple of those suggestions. That's the Pete Buttigieg and Cori Bush clips at the end. And there's also a link down there to do direct donations through PayPal, since I get the bulk of my financial support for making these videos from viewer support, not from ad revenue. So thank you, Lulu Girl, for that Super Chat contribution and the opportunity to put in my little e-begging segment or whatever. But I will move on to the next two news summaries, which are shorter. The next one is the news summary from CNN's State of the Union. Dana Bash was in. She's the co-host along with Jake Tapper. And you'll see in just a little over a minute, covered both the infrastructure deal and the pandemic. So I don't know why Fox News couldn't fit it in. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is in rewind. For the first time since February, the U.S. is averaging more than 100,000 new COVID cases per day. Hospitalizations and deaths are also once again on the rise, almost exclusively among the unvaccinated. President Biden this week flashed new levels of frustration, rebuking Republican governors for standing in the way of vaccine and mask requirements.
If some governors aren't willing to do the right thing to beat this pandemic, then they should allow businesses and universities who want to do the right thing to be able to do it. I say to these governors, please help. But if you aren't going to help, at least get out of the way.
All this as the Senate inches closer to passing the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure deal. The bill cleared a key procedural hurdle yesterday, but its dash across the finish line was stalled by, no surprise, a partisan stalemate. Senators are confident, though, that the deal will pass. When? Well, that remains a little bit murky. Joining us now is one.
Oh, that's Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, one of the more reasonable Republicans. Maybe because he's also a doctor, and I will have a clip of him, clip number 8. But the one thing I guess I could criticize that news summary that they had, like Biden's half of the Biden versus Republican governors on mask mandates and vaccine requirement argument. And they only showed Biden. They didn't show Ron DeSantis and his free society versus biomedical security state or anything like that. So I guess was that bias towards the left in the CNN State of the Union news summary. And then, of course, the last news summary is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, the shortest of the news summaries, and I will talk about it with you a little more after we watch together here.
Good morning. Hope you're doing well today. You can see from our open that lots of issues are competing for attention this week. Our roundtable and experts are here to break them all down, and we begin with the pandemic, as the Delta variant appears to be sweeping us back to the future. The 7-day average of daily cases an astounding 741% higher than it was in mid-June, topping 100,000 for the first time since early February. Hospitalizations are up by more than 40%, overwhelming healthcare workers in the hardest hit states. The good news, more than 50% of Americans are fully vaccinated, and the vaccination rate has picked up by 25% in the last week. NIH Director Francis Collins joins us now. Good morning, Dr. Collins. Thanks for joining us again this morning.
And I don't have the Francis Collins clip because I took the clip later in the show where George Stephanopoulos covers climate change with a couple climate scientists. I think that was a fairly good news summary. It did refer to the teaser or whatever they do before he comes on and says good morning. And they had various issues there, including Andrew Cuomo and his impeachment, which was covered by multiple news shows. I don't have any clips on that, although I did learn a fun fact about impeaching a New York governor this week, that if Andrew Cuomo actually is impeached, he actually leaves office immediately, and then the trial, there's a trial after impeachment to see if he's convicted. During that trial is to see if he gets to go back and be governor again. So wouldn't that have been nice if that had happened when they impeached Trump, that all of a sudden I guess that would have made Mike Pence president, but anything better than Trump? Anyway, that was a fun fact I learned about Andrew Cuomo's impeachment saga, which, I don't know, is that national news? I mean, it is big news, and Democrats have handled Andrew Cuomo so much better than Republicans have handled, well, Donald Trump, of course, but Matt Gaetz also. I don't know why it is the Republicans, they just close ranks behind people who do things that are not really defensible. And Governor Andrew Cuomo, based on the Attorney General's report, and I watched that whole thing this week, looks like if he doesn't resign, he will be impeached and he will be gone. So anyway, those are all the news summaries. So now I want to get to my newsmaker clips. First, I have 4 clips on the continuing pandemic threat. First, I want to show you Dr. Anthony Fauci on NBC News' Meet the Press talking to Chuck Todd first about the pandemic of the unvaccinated, what's the current threat from Delta, but also the threat to the vaccinated if this keeps spreading. And I actually edited together two clips. There was something in the middle about testing that I took out that I didn't think was as relevant, but this is 5 really important minutes of Dr. Anthony Fauci giving good information on why this Delta variant threat is so substantial, and then in the long term, in the future, how even the vaccinated could be threatened, which I've said this several times over the last few weeks, that even if you're vaccinated, you should care about the unvaccinated people, not just because you have human empathy and you don't want to see people suffer, but letting the virus continue to replicate gives it a chance to, or giving, this is actually, well, there's almost like a little rap song that Anthony Fauci does near the end, but I won't give it away. I almost sort of gave it away there, but I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch Dr. Anthony Fauci talking to Chuck Todd yesterday morning together over here.
Dr. Fauci, welcome back to Meet the Press. And I have to tell you, it feels like deja vu all over again, sir.
It sure does, Chuck. It sure does. This is a very difficult situation, and you described it very well.
Look, let me start with the CDC guidance and a bit of that confusion. And I say this, I know it's easy to backseat drive right now with Delta, but you were concerned about Delta in June. Obviously, the WHO was concerned about it in May. And yet, here you, in late June, you were saying you were feared that this was going to be the dominant strain and perhaps become a problem within a month. Well, here we are. But in that intervening days, there's been a ton of confusion from the CDC about when should we wear masks for the vaccinated, how transmissible is Delta among the vaccinated. Some of this has contributed, I think, to the frustration that we see out there today. Can we try to clear some of this up? How dangerous is this Delta variant for the vaccinated and the unvaccinated?
Well, it's extremely dangerous for the unvaccinated because if they get infected and if they stay unvaccinated and don't wear masks, ultimately they're going to wind up getting infected, and that's what we're concerned about. It is, as we've said, a pandemic and an outbreak of the unvaccinated. If you are vaccinated, you are very well protected against getting infected. Since no vaccine is 100% protective, there will be what we call breakthrough infections. That's the bad news. The good news is that almost invariably that will be an infection that is either without symptoms or minimally symptomatic, which means the vaccine still protects extremely well against severe disease leading to hospitalization and deaths. But the interesting and unfortunate thing that we found out that gets to the mask issue is that this virus is so easily transmissible that if a vaccinated person gets a breakthrough infection, which will happen, Chuck, you can expect that because no vaccine is 100% effective. Back when we were dealing with the Alpha variant, the level of virus was very low in the nasopharynx of a vaccinated person if they got infected. Now we're finding that the level of virus is really quite high, which means one of the bad things about all of this is that even though you're protected from getting severe disease, if you're infected, you can transmit it to someone else, even if you're vaccinated. And that's the fundamental basis of now saying people should be wearing masks in indoor public places when you're in a region that has a high level of infection.
Let's go with what the next month's going to look like. You seem to have a dire picture. You expect, we're at 118,000 cases today of the 7-day average. You're expecting it to hit to 200. Our peak was 256. According to our data. This is pre-vaccine. I mean, this seems to be not only are we back to square one, but where does this lead us for the next 3 months? Are we going to have an even worse fall and winter?
Well, Chuck, there are two really serious aspects about this. As we've said all along, this is fundamentally an outbreak, a pandemic among the unvaccinated. That is proven true. You said that in the lead-in to the show. No doubt about that. One of the problems of that is you don't want people to get sick and to get hospitalized and to die. And that is actually happening now predominantly, overwhelmingly predominantly among the unvaccinated. But there's another aspect to that that concerns us in the public health sector when you have the dynamics of virus that continues to have the virus circulate in the community, as we're seeing mostly in unvaccinated parts of the country, usually the southern states, as you mentioned. What happens if you allow the virus to freely circulate? There's a tenet that everybody knows in virology. A virus will not mutate unless you allow it to replicate. So if you allow the virus to freely circulate and not try and stop it, sooner or later there is a likelihood that you will get another variant that could, I'm not saying it will, that could be more problematic than the Delta. Fortunately for us, the vaccines do quite well against Delta, particularly in protecting you from severe disease. But if you give the virus a chance to continue to change, you're leading to a vulnerability that we might get a worse variant, and then that will impact not only the unvaccinated, that will impact the vaccinated, because that variant could evade the protection of the vaccine. So people who are unvaccinated should think about their own health, that of their family, but also the community responsibility to crush this virus before it becomes even worse.
Did you catch kind of like the weird like rap song lyrics in there? You know, it's if you let it circulate where they don't vaccinate, it will replicate so it can mutate. That's going to exacerbate and escalate, and our pandemic fate is not going to be great. No, I don't know, but there was something like weird cadence in there. Maybe it's just me, but I thought that there was some really good information from Dr. Anthony Fauci there, both about the dangers of the Delta variant to the unvaccinated and to our country where we have so many unvaccinated people, but also in that second part as to how allowing it to circulate and replicate gives it a chance to mutate, and then we might be, I hope we don't, I mean, what happens if we like start, what do they do after the Greek letters? I mean, you talked, we're in the Delta variant, and they've talked about this Lambda variant from Peru, which supposedly is not all that much more dangerous than anything we've seen so far, according to reports I've seen. But, I mean, where are we going to get to? I mean, a year from now or a year and a half from now, am I going to be talking about the Omega variant? And what comes after the Omega variant? I don't know. But anyway, that was good information from Dr. Anthony Fauci, and I want to show you three kind of decreasingly rational Republicans. First, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who actually is a doctor, and so he gives good advice as a doctor, and you'll see, and he even contradicts what Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida did, not as a doctor, but as a Republican, because what Ron DeSantis did, saying that local school districts can't have mask mandates, well, that's not local control. That's like from, was it Tallahassee? Is Tallahassee the capital of Florida? You know, that's like governing from Tallahassee, like instead of letting people have local control, which is supposedly a conservative Republican idea. And then I'll contrast that with Asa Hutchinson, who went along with a state law prohibiting mask mandates and now feels sorry about it. And then finally Rick Scott, who is all about giving good people information because the American people are so smart, and get vaccinated if you're comfortable. If you're comfortable getting vaccinated, you know, I don't know why he had to throw that in. But anyway, I've like pre-criticized 3 clips in a row here. Pre-criticized all 3 clips. Let me start with the first one. Bill Cassidy talking as a doctor, but also as a conservative Republican about local control, to Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union yesterday morning over here.
Senator, I want to talk about infrastructure in a moment, but I want to start by discussing the pandemic, which is really ravaging the country and especially your state of Louisiana. It's in dire crisis, a record number of hospitalizations. ICUs are running out of beds. You are also a physician. So when you see this, what goes through your mind?
Well, we can stop it. We have it within our power to stop it. Each person that is vaccinated now protects not only herself or himself, but those around him, because no longer is she as likely to pass the infection to others. If we don't want this, we have it within our control. All we need to do is to get vaccinated.
Your state's governor, Don Bell Edwards, issued a new mask mandate, put it into effect this week. Was that the right move?
Well, I'm now going to speak as a doctor. If you have a large percentage of your population which is not vaccinated and your infection rate is going up, you got one of two choices. If you're inside, either you're vaccinated or you have to wear a mask. Otherwise, you're at too great a risk to further spread infection, to further pack those emergency rooms, to further prevent people who have terrible accidents from getting cared for because the hospital is full of COVID. And there is a choice. On the other hand, if we don't want mask mandates, get vaccinated, the infection rate goes down and you don't have a mandate.
So it sounds like you're saying that's a yes, given where
As a
things
doctor, I will tell you, you've got two choices to stop that infection.
Okay.
Either get vaccinated or wear a mask.
Some governors, like Ron DeSantis in Florida, Greg Abbott in Texas, they're blocking local officials from imposing restrictions like mask mandates. The virus is surging to record highs in those states, including yours. So, as you said, you are a doctor, you are an elected official. Shouldn't local officials be allowed to make decisions like mask mandates if they believe that's best for their local community?
I'm a conservative. I think you govern best when you govern closest to the people being governed. And if a local community is having their ICU is full, and the people at the local schools see that they've got to make sure they stay open because otherwise children miss out for another year of school, and they put in policy, then the local official should be listened to. That is a conservative principle.
So you disagree with Governor DeSantis?
I do disagree with Governor DeSantis. The local official should have control here. I don't want top down from Washington, D.C. I don't want top down from a governor's office. Sometimes, yes, okay, national defense and such like that. But when it comes to local conditions, if my hospital's full and my vaccination rate is low and infection rate is going crazy, we should allow local officials to make those decisions best for their community.
So there you see Senator Bill Cassidy, one of the Republican senators who voted to remove Donald Trump from office in the 2020, in the second impeachment over the insurrection. So already showing himself to be sort of a reasonable outlier amongst Republicans. And even as a doctor, I mean, just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you're reasonable. I mean, look at Senator Rand Paul, right? But here's a Republican doctor giving reasonable advice in terms of allowing local officials, and like I said before I showed the clip, not just as a doctor, but actually as a conservative, touting local control, which is supposedly something conservatives believe in. But Republicans these days, the Trump and post-Trump Republican Party, they don't really believe in much of anything other than, you know, owning the libs and supporting Trump and maybe even the big lie, or getting rid of the ability of people to actually vote in a free and fair election and have the results matter. Or I don't know what the Republican Party believes in now, but it's not those things Bill Cassidy was talking about, in my opinion. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments section. I'm now going to go to my next, actually fairly reasonable Republican, Governor Asa Hutchinson. I mean, in terms of reasonable compared to other Republicans, which is a really low bar. But Asa Hutchinson did not veto a bill earlier, or I think it was last year, where his Republican legislature in Arkansas prohibited mask mandates at the local level. But now he regrets it, and I guess a court has overturned it, but he explains why, again, what Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida and Governor Greg Abbott in Texas are doing are wrong. And this is from a Republican governor in Arkansas, Arkansas being right next to Texas. And I will talk about that clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
I want to start with schools and masks before we move on to the bigger issue of vaccinations. But they're related, because in schools, those under 12 can't get vaccinated. You signed a bill that was against mask mandates. You changed your position. Why?
Well, facts change, and leaders have to adjust to the new facts that you have and the reality of what you have to deal with. Whenever I signed that law, our cases were low. We were hoping that the whole thing was gone in terms of the virus, but it roared back with the Delta variant. And whenever, you know, we're pushing the vaccines out, but those under 12, cannot get vaccinated in the schools. And so I realized that we needed to have more options for our local school districts to protect those children. And so I asked the legislature to redo the law that prohibited those requirements or those options for the school districts to protect the children. And so it was an error to sign that law. I admit that. Thank goodness if the legislature did not act this week, which they didn't, the court stepped in and held that as unconstitutional. And now we have that local flexibility for schools to make their decision to protect the children based upon the unique circumstances of their district.
When you say facts change, do you see something in the last few weeks, particularly with respect to those under 12 who are in hospitals who are getting COVID? Did you see and learn more about the way in which the Delta variant is affecting that specific part of your community?
We have, and part of it is that the Delta variant is so transmissible that it affects every population. The higher age group populations have been vaccinated, so we're seeing 40-year-olds in the hospital and on vents, and then it goes down. And while the children are less susceptible to it and have less at risk, still a small number of children find themselves in the hospital. We've had over 24 in our children's hospital. We've had 3 adolescents die. They couldn't be vaccinated, and so I look at that and I say that we've got to do everything we can to protect those children. Everybody else can be vaccinated and are pushing those vaccinations. We don't need other stringent measures there because vaccine is their solution. But for those under 12, we want them to go to school, and we need to have that flexibility because they do have some risk.
I want to get to the vaccine solution in a moment, but quickly about the Marion School District. I think there are about 900 students and teachers in quarantine. Do you feel like that wouldn't have happened if the school district had had the freedom of local control and the ability to have a mask mandate in that school district?
Well, if we would have had more vaccines out, those numbers would have been less. But it illustrates the point that if we're going to have a successful school year, school districts like Marion need to have that option to require masks for those lower grades or make the decision that's suitable for their community. But let me emphasize a point here that ordinarily you have about 2.5 contacts from one exposure that has to be quarantined. But in the school environment, it was more like 18 to 1. And so that's why we had so many that were quarantined, and you can't have a successful school year with that kind of exposure in the school. And so vaccines, as well as flexibility of the local school district, would be the key in my judgment.
And that was actually one of the scariest things I heard on the news shows yesterday, with that 18 to 1 thing. And that's what I've been hearing about this Delta variant. But that was even worse because I've been hearing that, like, with the Alpha variant, it was more like if you got COVID, you would infect 2 people, and now it's more like 5 or 5 to 8, 2 to 3 versus 5 to 8 people, and that's why it's so much more. That's why it's so much more transmissible. But 18 to 1, that is really scary, especially in the schools, and especially with what you saw in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary about 20% of the cases being kids. That is like something really bad could be happening, and especially because you saw Asa Hutchinson there do several things that Republicans, I guess, aren't supposed to do. He was basing his policy on facts. Not only basing his policy on facts and science, but changing his policy based on learning new facts and science. And worst of all, something the Trump and post-Trump Republican Party, and I think it's still the Trump Republican Party. It's not the post. I don't even know why I'm saying post-Trump, but the Trump Republican Party, one thing you're never supposed to do is admit you were wrong. And you hear Asa Hutchinson say that it was an error to sign that bill prohibiting local mask mandates. It was an error, and he admits he was wrong. You're supposed to admit nothing, deny everything. Isn't that like one of the main Trump Republican Party rules? So I don't know if they're gonna kick him out for that, but now I'm gonna show you the least reasonable of the Republicans on this topic. My final pandemic clip. This is Senator Rick Scott, former Florida Governor Rick Scott, who is supporting what Ron DeSantis is doing, prohibiting local school districts from having mask mandates. And you can give Bret Baier, the supposedly straight news anchor of Fox News, a little bit of credit for asking the question, but there's no follow-up. He lets Rick Scott get away with it. We just want to give people good information, and, well, whatever. His answer is terrible. I think I mentioned earlier in the show, he doesn't tell people to get vaccinated. He said, if you're comfortable with it, get vaccinated. Well, the problem is too many people aren't comfortable with it. Make them comfortable. Tell them to get vaccinated. Tell them to get comfortable. This is, like I said, the worst of the Republicans on today's show. Rick Scott, Senator from Florida. Tell me what you think when we watch the clip together over here.
The economy.
I want to turn to COVID, if I could. Your state has seen a major rise in COVID cases, hospitalizations. This is what the president said this week.
But the state with the lowest vaccination rates are seeing 10 to 20 times as many new cases per 100,000 people. It's moving like wildfire through the unvaccinated community. And it's heartbreaking. Just two states, Florida and Texas, account for 1/3 of all new COVID-19 cases in the entire country. If some governors aren't willing to do the right thing to beat this pandemic, then they should allow businesses and universities who want to do the right thing to be able to do it.
Now, Florida makes up 6.5% of the U.S. population, and as the president mentioned, it does account for nearly 22% of the country's new COVID cases. You have 60% of the hospitals saying they could see staffing shortages. You've got 187 children in the hospital there in Florida, which is a record down there. Yet during this time, Governor DeSantis, the Florida governor, signed an executive order barring school districts from forcing kids and students to mask up to protect their freedom to choose. Should he have done that now?
Well, first off, I have a lot of concern for all the people that have gotten COVID. I had COVID, but I also took the vaccine. If you feel comfortable, I think everybody ought to get the vaccine, and you ought to do whatever you can to make sure your family's safe. Here's what I think government ought to do: give us good information. I mean, here's what's been frustrating about this. Since COVID started, it's been all political. Just give us good information. Americans are smart. They'll make good decisions for their families. And we can't go back to fear. Fear that kills jobs, fear that shuts down schools, fears that slows everything down, because it hurts all families. Here's what I believe we ought to do at every level of government. Let's be honest. If you feel comfortable, get the vaccine. If you don't, figure out how you're going to keep yourself safe. I mean, that's what I believe we ought to be doing, and I'm gonna do everything I can to tell people, that I've been comfortable with the vaccine. I had COVID. I don't want anybody to get COVID.
Do you think former President Trump and other senior Republicans are doing enough talking about vaccinations and the need for the population to get that to keep people safe?
Well, he got the vaccine. I mean, I've done everything I can to try to make sure people are comfortable getting the vaccine. I think that's what every Republican I know is trying to make sure people get good information, and just tell people, if you feel comfortable, get the vaccine. I mean, I talked to a good friend this week that got sick because he didn't get vaccine, and my heart goes out to him and his family. I hope no one else gets sick. It's I've been blessed. I've got grandkids. I don't want any of them to get sick. So be careful, but let people make their choices. This is not a country where we need people telling us what to do. I love my mom. I hate her telling me what to do. Give me good information. I'll make a good decision.
Speaking of former President Trump, do you believe he's going to run in 2024?
I love my mom. I hate her telling me what to do. That is like 1 degree farther than the nanny state argument you hear from Republicans. It's the mommy state. Mommy's telling me what to do. I don't want to do what you say, Mommy. No, it's science telling you what to do. It's science telling local school districts that, he talked about his grandkids there. No follow-up from Bret Baier on, do you want your grandkids to go to school with a whole bunch of other kids who might have COVID not wearing masks? there was no follow-up. He just let him get away with it. I just want people to have good information. Well, the good information is that schools in places where there's high COVID spread should be requiring their students to wear masks. That's good information. You heard it from, both the last two Republicans talking about it, as well as Anthony Fauci, and I don't know why, but the sad part is Rick Scott is much more representative of the Republican Party than the last two Republicans I showed. So you can let me know what you think about the decreasingly reasonable Republicans I showed versus the great information from Anthony Fauci, both about the dangers of the Delta variant pandemic of the unvaccinated and then the threat to the vaccinated from letting it circulate and replicate and mutate. So anyway, that's the end of the pandemic topic, which is a real huge threat and I think is worth covering with all the time I spent on it this week. But like I was saying at the beginning of the program, I think people looking back on this time period in 50 or 100 years, they'll be looking to see, were we really talking about what was most important, which was the threat of climate change. And that gets covered every now and then, and it has been in the last few weeks, especially with the wildfires. You know, I live here in California. I've had several days. I'm looking at, the sky's not orange today, so that's good. But like every summer, for several summers, there have been many, many days where the air has been unhealthy for everybody. And it's just one of the many ways that we're seeing climate change isn't something that's happening in the future. It's something that's happening now. And ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos had these two scientists on, Dr. Christina Dahl and Dr. Michael Mann, talking about the International Panel on Climate Change putting out a report that came out today. I put a link down in the video description to the full press release titled Climate Change Widespread, Rapid, and Intensifying, with links to the full first installment of the IPCC's sixth assessment report, which is coming out in 2022, but it's coming out in installments, and the first installment just came out that proves that climate change is here, it's rapid, it's intensifying, it's something we need to work on now. And that has something to do with the second infrastructure bill that I talked about last week and showed how Joe Manchin is maybe a tool of the oil industry that's going to blow up that whole effort. But I don't want to talk about that now. I want to talk about these two climate scientists talking to George Stephanopoulos on This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday over with a brief introduction. I saw one of my viewers from Europe shares Gallagher in the live comments asking, am I going to talk about Governor Newsom? And because we got the California wildfires, well, you're going to see a clip of Governor Gavin Newsom. I'm not going to talk about the recall. Maybe I will talk about that in subsequent shows. But you will see a clip of Governor Gavin Newsom and some clips of wildfires. And they show some of the dystopic landscapes of California in the background of the doctors talking. And anyway, I'll talk about this clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
It's almost turned into a 12-month season in terms of fighting these fires. And every year it gets more and more intense. And it just shows you the effect that global warming is having on our environment.
The world is radically changing. This climate change is real. You may not believe in science. You got to believe your own damn eyes. Look around.
Climate change is here. It's real. And it's like a hammer hitting us in the head, and we have to take action.
West Coast governors speaking about those deadly wildfires tearing across the region, brought on by record heat waves, severe droughts, and forest conditions, all exacerbated by climate change. It comes as wildfires also rage across Greece, Turkey, and Russia, forcing thousands to flee. Here to discuss what's causing the fires, what can be done, Professor Michael Mann, director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State, author of The New Climate War, and Christina Dahl, senior climate scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And Dr. Dahl, let me begin with you. Talk about the connection between this extreme weather we're seeing, the wildfires both here and around the world, and climate change.
Sure. So around the world, what we're seeing is that very hot conditions tend to worsen any drought conditions that places might be experiencing. So you end up with severe drought coupled with a drying out of vegetation. And that vegetation then becomes fuel for fires to burn. So we're seeing places like the western U.S. really become a tinderbox, ready to burn with any spark.
And Dr. Mann, as we look around the world and we see this raging, not just in the West, but as we said, in Greece and Turkey and other countries, we know that there are still a lot of skeptics out there who say you can't tie this directly to climate change. You can't tie any single event to climate change. What do you say to that?
Well, there's a report that's going to be coming out tomorrow, in fact, the next report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And this time, the report really connects the dots. The signal, as we call it, has emerged from the noise. We can see the impacts of climate change playing out now in real time on our television screens and in our newspaper headlines. Dangerous climate change has arrived, and at this point, it's a question of how bad we're willing to let it get.
So the question is, hey, what do we do about it right now, Dr.
Oh, sorry. I think I might have said what the IPCC stands for incorrectly there. It's actually the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And like I said, I put a link down in the video description to the first installment of their 6th report or whatever it is that, like Dr. Michael Mann said at the end of that clip, really connects the dots. I put a link to the press release that then you can use to get to the full report. But it connects the dots between climate change that is here now and some of these extreme weather events, including the wildfires, not just in California and the West, but as George Stephanopoulos was saying, in Greece and Turkey. And there are all sorts of extreme weather events that are just going to be increasing. And I'm glad that the Biden administration has rejoined the Paris Climate Accords, and maybe there are ways, if you click on the link down in the video description to the full ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos program, they actually talk about how it's not too late if we actually do good things now. We can stop the worst, the 3 degrees centigrade, I think it is, from happening. And so it's not too late, but it's a really important story, and we're already in for some pretty horrendous consequences for what we've done already, is the commentary I would put in there. And so even though I only have that 2.5 minute clip, I think that story is just as important as the pandemic story, which, has killed over 600,000 Americans and looks like it's on its way back up. So those are the 2 main topics. I did mention at the beginning of the program that I've started doing this thing where on Saturdays I post the AP's guest list for the Sunday shows for my patrons and for my YouTube members. Actually, even I can't get rid of this stupid pinned comment I deleted the comment instead of unpinning it, and now it just says message retracted, and it's like hovering over the live comments. I wish it would. I can't figure out. There's some sort of glitch that won't let me unpin it and get rid of it. But so I put it 3 different places, and I asked people for requests from the lists of people who are going to be on the Sunday shows. Who do you think I should take clips from? I didn't get anyone's permission to mention their name, but I did get a request for Pete Buttigieg and a request for Cori Bush. So these next 2 clips, even though it wasn't on my topic and of pandemic and climate change, Pete Buttigieg, actually, the person who suggested Pete Buttigieg suggested him because saying that he does a great job on it going on Fox News, and that's usually true, but I didn't think he did such a great job of challenging Fox News on the Republican talking points that they're always using. And in fact, when Bret Baier asked him about how he was against deficits when he was a presidential candidate, he had a pretty good answer in terms of the infrastructure bills, but he actually promoted a Republican talking point in his response here. He talks about how Republicans are, fiscally conservative, which they say they are, but especially when it comes to like the tax cuts for the big corporations and the rich under the Trump administration, they just gave away all this money. That's one of the reasons we have such big deficits. And Pete Buttigieg did not emphasize that point. So I was a little disappointed in the Pete Buttigieg clip I will show you to make that point over here.
Talking about infrastructure and improving roads and bridges, there are other things in this bill. I want to talk about their concerns, though. Republicans who are not for this, they're concerned about the deficit and debt. As a candidate, then Mayor Pete, as we called you then, you spoke a lot about the federal debt. You said on the trail that it worried you deeply and that Democrats should talk about it. Take a listen.
Time has come for my party to get a lot more comfortable owning this issue, because we've seen what's happening under this president, $1 trillion deficit, and his allies in Congress do not care. So we better do something about it.
So is there any indication, Mr. Secretary, that your party is taking the advice of Mayor Pete?
Absolutely, and you can tell because the president put forward a way for this to be fully paid for from day one when the American Jobs Plan was released. And the pay-fors that are in this bill are appropriate for a bill that's going to grow the economy and grow U.S. productivity. Look, you don't see the number of conservative Republicans supporting this bill that you do unless it's fiscally responsible. And I would also, again, point to the cost of doing nothing, whether we're talking about the federal budget and deficit or whether we're talking about the economy as a whole. We simply cannot be in a robust fiscal, financial, and economic position with third-rate infrastructure. I think that's a common sense fact that most Americans get, and I think it's why, with this bill, we're seeing something that you don't see very much in today's Washington, which is Republicans and Democrats, not all of them, but an awful lot of them, standing side by side saying, yes, this is the right thing to do. Let's get it over the finish line.
Yeah, Again, I come back to the House Speaker saying she's tying it to the second bill, and that's really
So, like I said, that was a pretty good answer on the details from Pete Buttigieg, but saying, there wouldn't be so many conservative Republicans supporting this if it weren't fiscally responsible, I think plays right into a false Republican talking point that conservative Republicans have ever, they've talked about being fiscally responsible, but have they ever actually been when they're in power? No. And that was actually something Bret Baier brought up a little more with Rick Scott, showing how how Trump had increased the deficit and the debt, but he let Rick Scott get away with talking about how he balanced the budget as governor of Florida, where I think you have to balance the budget. I think in 49 and 50 states, and I think Florida is one of them where they have to balance the budget. So it's always a weak talking point that governors use. But anyway, the final clip. Oh, before I get to the final clip, I did see that I got some more. I saw Von Rick upgraded membership. I think I have Von Rick's shipping address through Patreon somewhere because I can't. Von Rick did a member upgrade to sticker level, which means I'm supposed to send one of these #LiberalViewer stickers, but then YouTube gives me no way of getting people's addresses to send them stuff. So be warned, if you become a YouTube member to get a sticker or a Constitution, unless I can figure out some way to get your shipping address, there's no way I can send it to you. Although I think I could do that for Von Rick, but I appreciate upgrading your membership, YouTube membership, Von Rick. And then Tom Trask gave me a super chat contribution, so thanks for that. And now I want to get to the final clip before the bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip at the end of my dog Sandy and my cat Dash. But before I get to that, I want to show a clip of Representative Cori Bush from St. Louis. I lived in St. Louis for 5 years. That's where I graduated law school. I was a public defender, criminal defense attorney in St. Louis County, Missouri, which includes Ferguson, where Michael Brown was killed. I think we're right near the anniversary of his death. I saw that in the Representative Cori Bush interview. She mentioned the Michael Brown anniversary. She mentioned how she did this sit-in in Congress. She slept outside till they extended the eviction moratorium, which shows how activism in a member of Congress is something you don't see a lot. And actually got results this week. So kudos to Cori Bush for that. And she also talked about the difference between being an activist and being a legislator, and how activists help legislators get things done. I actually recommend all of that if you click on the link down in the video description for CNN's State of the Union. You can watch the whole program, including that interview with Cori Bush on those topics. But this last clip, even I wanted to provide that context because I'm about to criticize Cori Bush. I don't think she did such a great job in how she defended having private security, but also defended being in favor of defunding the police. And I've been seeing that over and over again on Fox News since I watch way too much Fox News. They've been making so much political hay out of this remark of hers, and Dana Bash asked her about it, and I don't think she really defended it well, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that final Newsmaker clip together over here.
Congresswoman, I want to ask about the criticism that you're facing about comments you made in an interview this past week. I want our viewers to listen.
I'm going to make sure I have security because I know I have had attempts on my life and I have too much work to do. There are too many people that need help right now for me to allow that. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend $10 more on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police.
So I know you've seen that Republicans are pointing to the fact that you said you have your own security while almost in the same breath advocating for defunding the police. Now, I do want to emphasize, I understand you have security protection because you have received multiple death threats, but the clip that I just played is being used in attack ads against not you, but not just you, but other Democrats. So could those comments end up being harmful to your fellow Democrats, politically speaking?
I think what we have to look at is the fact that I made it to Congress in 2020. I was elected to Congress, and we're still fighting this same fight. We're still fighting to save Black lives. That work was not done before I got here. This is the reason why I ran, was to save lives, to save my son's life. It was because Michael Brown, who we're fighting for, still trying to get justice for, it's because he didn't get justice, and Vondaire Myers didn't get justice, and Kajim Powell didn't get justice, and so many others. That is why. And because that was not fixed before I got here, to then come at me and say, you're the reason why we have these problems. No, the reason why we have these problems is because those that were in power and could have fixed this problem before now didn't, and it cost lives. And so now that I'm here, we just introduced the People's Response Act to make sure that we are looking at the money that should be going to social safety nets, to make sure that our community members who are living with mental health issues are able to function and live in society the way that anyone would ask to. So I don't believe, as far as my colleagues, I absolutely empathize. But you know what? The same thing that the Republicans would do, which is figure out how to work with this on a comms basis. That's what we have to do. My job is to save lives, the lives in my community. Because when we're talking about every single year increasing the budget for police, and then the budget for like health and human services continuing to shrink, and St. Louis being number one for police violence year after year after year, number one, number two for homicides year and year after year. So when we're adding more money to the police, but we're still dying. So something has to change.
And I hear what you're saying, but I also heard you say that you think it's a comms problem. Is it that? Because
no, I'm saying that we can also, that's another way that you can tackle this. You have to tackle it from more than one place. We have to work on what we want to say, what is our message, but then we also have to understand that we have to save lives too. St. Louis can't keep being put on the back burner at all that, and I'm here to stand up for my community.
Congresswoman Cori Bush, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I understand what Cori Bush is saying there, but in terms of having a communications problem, I think Cori Bush kind of created the communications problem by creating that bad soundbite I've seen over and over again on Fox News. And like I said, I am a huge supporter of what Cori Bush is doing as an activist, but it doesn't help the cause to create a soundbite like that, and maybe Cori Bush should work on her comms, like her messaging, and decide, like, especially since when she made that comment, she'd already been getting heat for having this private security. I mean, you could come up with messaging for that, to, you know, like many Americans, I don't feel protected by our the over-policing and under-policing we get from our, you know, police industrial complex, where the rich and the powerful and those in political favor get the security of the police state, but the marginalized and those who, you know, are not part of that police industrial complex have to feel constantly in fear, and so she's paying the price for that fear while still working to fix the problem. Or I don't know, I just made that up right now. It wasn't half bad or whatever, but needs some work. But something Cori Bush should have worked on before she said anything, and come up with like a message that actually promotes the cause of, I mean, defunding the police is a controversial slogan. I talked about it on my Sunday show when it first came out, and talked about how it's an ambiguous term that can be used to create coalitions, but it's also an ambiguous term that now the right wing is trying to turn into a cudgel against the supposed crime crisis, another talking point I see emphasized day after day on Fox News. And anyway, I think I've added enough of my commentary. But if you want to know what Cori Bush is fighting for, and mass incarceration and over-policing and putting an end to that, as usual, I recommend reading this book that's been up here for many, many years, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, if you really want to understand the problem of mass incarceration. And with that, I will now transition to my final non-news clip. This is the Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip. Just with all the partisanship in the world, I like to show how even dogs and cats can live together. My cat Dash can drink while my dog Sandy gets his food, and they're just right there. They say fighting like cats and dogs. Well, why can't Republicans and Democrats get along like cats and dogs, as you'll see in this clip? So there you go. Pandemics, climate change, dogs and cats living together. Wasn't that Ghostbusters 2, Sign of the Apocalypse? Anyway, I hope you appreciate the Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip, all the other news clips I picked out for you, the time and effort I put into producing this show and broadcasting the show, etc., etc. I will continue doing it through the summer and then decide exactly what I want to do beyond that. I'm still thinking of some of these edited, produced videos, like this critical race theory one I was talking about earlier, so keep an eye on that. And if that's something you'd like to see me do, then, you know, support videos like that when I put them out, so that they actually get views and traction, etc., etc. But anyway, I will see you next Monday and every Monday for at least a few more months, and I appreciate all of you who showed up to support the live show, my recorded show viewers and their comments. You can give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.